All right, and then about to Jesus and the and my whole the Passover plot concept. I know you. I believe you're friends with Hugh Schonenfeld. Is that right, or you know him?
No, I wish I had been. He's been gone for some years
Okay, but
now.
you knew that whole Passover. You were quite familiar with that whole Passover plot book, right?
Hmm.
And so then Chris Bennett was the one. Again, I mentioned him. He was the one who had said, "Well, cannabis would fit the bill," because Hugh Schonenfeld doesn't. He says that he suggests that that Jesus was drugged on on the cross, but he doesn't say what the drug was. He doesn't
Right.
identify the drug, and Chris is the one who points out that it could have been cannabis. That actually, medically speaking, cannabis does do that. It will. A really strong tincture can knock your ass out and make you look like you're dead for 2 days. I mean, I know people who have done it in modern times. Like they have made tinctures so strong that they knocked their friends out and they thought they were dead, but they didn't die. And that the medical literature is replete with catalepsy as being one of the main things that they observe in high doses of cannabis. It doesn't kill. There's never been an overdose, a fatal overdose of cannabis, even when they were trying to. I mean, there's a lot of science from the 19th century of attempting to kill animals with high doses of
Oh yeah.
cannabis in order to establish what the fatal death limits are, and they never succeeded. They would give increasingly heavy doses to small dogs and never succeeded in killing them. They only succeeded in knocking them out for a couple of days. And so that this, in theory, I mean, I'm not saying this is what happened, but I do think it's a worthwhile, entertaining theory, and if nothing else, it's a good way to talk about the medical efficacy of cannabis. That and that it could have been like that. It could have gone down that they drugged them on the cross, and this tincture would have worked. And that it would have been, and again, it would have been the women. It would have been Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary. They would have been the ones doing it, and it would have been the women that knew this stuff because they're the ones who are potion makers. They're the ones who would have access to this kind of knowledge. The men didn't know this stuff, and the men didn't listen to the women anyway. So,
Yeah, even in that story when in Luke where they say, "We've seen the Lord." Yeah, yeah, right. I guess it's that time of the month. Oh boy.
the women pulled a fast one on the men, and they had some help. Joseph of Arimathea, that the grave. I mean, that was a pretty handy thing to have ready. Like there just happened to be this grave nearby. Like, oh, I think it was all, assuming it happened at all, it was all a setup that they had. It was like an Evil Knievel level of daring. I mean, it was like he had to be a pretty crazy motherfucker to go do something like that. Voluntarily get crucified with an attempt to fake your death and trick the authorities. I mean, that is a pretty bold thing to do and incredibly dangerous. But people do crazy, dangerous things all the time.
Yeah,
So
yeah. You can't uh, say, well, most people wouldn't have done it, so it's improbable that he did it. That's just flawed historical reasoning. I mean, people do, like you say, do improbable stuff all the time. The I think Schoenfield thought it was Essenes that did it, and he doesn't bring in the women, though that's not a bad, by any means, alternate way of looking at it. Like, I don't laugh off the swoon theory, as it's often called, or as the German rationalists called it, the Scheintod, the seeming death theory. Um, Friedrich Schleiermacher, the father of liberal theology, he believed that. And he then spoke of the second life of the Redeemer, that he was able to go back out and teach for a while, but then he did succumb to death. My take on this is that I think there are such clear signs that in some earlier version of the story, that is what they expected us to think happened. And that this isn't that odd from a literary viewpoint, because in at least three of the surviving Hellenistic romance adventure novels, or plenty of these things back for several centuries, flourishing especially in the second century CE, you had stories where the heroine went into a coma and was buried prematurely, but just body placed in an opulent tomb because she was part of the aristocracy. and that everybody thought she was dead, including tomb robbers who had their eye on the tomb because they figured whoever gets buried in this is going to be all kinds of great stuff in there to steal, kind of like the pharaohs with their possessions. And so they said, "Hey, look at this! The door is sealed. There's some aristocrat in there. Let's go." And so at night they pry the thing open, and sure enough, there are goodies in there. But the woman is just waking up, and they're, "Oh, what is this?" And they realized what must have happened. But they said, "Okay, now we have a witness. Well, we're not going to kill her, but tell you what, let's kidnap her and sell her as a slave, and nobody will be the wiser." Well, they do that, and the next morning her fiance or husband or whoever comes in to mourn, and he says, "Hey, somebody's already opened the tomb." And he goes in there and finds the grave clothes lying there, but there's no body. And he says, "Oh my God, wouldn't you know it? The gods were jealous of me, having this beautiful wife. They've taken her up to heaven." And then somebody says, "No, look at this," and they figure out what happened. So the rest of a long story is the husband or whatever chasing her around the Mediterranean, always on the verge of meeting up with her. And in the process, he runs afoul of the authorities, and he is either condemned to be crucified or is crucified. But either way, he escapes it alive. And then finally, there's this joyous reunion between the two lovers, and they say, "I thought you were dead, but you're alive." I mean, it sounds kind of familiar to me. And there are these hints in the Gospels. Jesus prays to be spared the crucifixion. God's not going to hear his prayer. That seems odd. There's irony at the crucifixion again. Yeah, let this Messiah, King of Israel, come down alive from the cross, and then we'll believe it. You stupid fools. That's exactly what's going to happen. And the thing where he dies, he loses consciousness, and they tell Pilate, and he said, "What, he's dead already? Go check." And they say, "Yeah, he's dead." Said, "Okay, you're welcome to the body." So Joseph of Arimathea, who is called specifically a wealthy man, he says, "Well, I have a tomb waiting for me. Let's bury him there." And then, of course, you know what happens. Well, the theory I have is that in an early version of this, it was modeled on these heroic epics, and the point was that Jesus survived death. He cheated death, and when he comes back, and the disciples who weren't in on it, when they see him, they're astounded. I'd love to see Kramer do that in science. He says, "You're alive again," and Jesus says, "No, look at my hands and feet. It is I myself. No ghost has flesh and bones as you see that I have." Is he saying, "Yeah, I was dead, but I'm back"? Or is he saying, I didn't die, or else seeing me would be seeing a ghost"? No, it's really me. It sounds to me like in this version of the story, it was the swoon theory, and that he was doped up and so on, but that under the influence of the mystery religions with their dying and rising gods or whatever, by the time we read it, it's all been changed to an actual death and resurrection. I think I'm probably the only nut that holds that view. So I can't.
I mean, but that's what the Muslims believe. I mean, the Muslims are the second biggest religion in the world. They revere Jesus as a holy prophet. There's plenty of smart Muslims over the centuries, plenty of intellectuals, and they hold to this. They don't say exactly what they think happened. They say either he survived or it was substituted. They don't, as a matter of doctrine, don't say what happened. They just say that he didn't actually die. He was
taken up to heaven.
It's like if you saw a man crucified and then a couple of days later you saw him alive, doesn't it simply make sense that he just didn't die?
Right. Yeah.
So to me, that's just like, it's just not hard to believe. Like if he had prompt nursing care, which he did, and he has, treated with medicines and bandaged up and left to sleep for 2 days. I mean, what better treatment could you ask for after being brutalized like that, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's a nutty theory. My version is just that it does seem to me that John, for instance, is trying to say, oh, no, he really died, the blood and the water. Why is he making a big deal out of that? Because other people thought that Jesus survived the cross.
Right.
I mean, he has to be. That's what it has to be. So I do hold a form of that. It's just that I don't know what happened or if there even was a Jesus, but in terms of literary traditions, it seems to me that at some point it was being close to the Gospels. It was being told as a swoon theory kind of a thing, like these novels. It was a common idea in the air.
And I listen to these debates all the time between apologists and atheists over exactly the resurrection stuff, and no one talks about the swoon theory. It's really funny. Like, it totally doesn't get much airtime at all. Like, Christians totally dismiss it. Like, how could he possibly survive those wounds?
Yeah.
Like, why not? Like, the wounds weren't that serious. He got flogged, he got stabbed, he got brutalized, but is it any worse than being thrown through a windshield in a car accident? People survive those kinds of accidents all the time. If you've got prompt medical attention and medicine and, TLC, and that's what Jesus had. He had, the women that loved him. He had a safe room to be laid down in. He was bandaged up. He was medicated. He was sedated. I think it's totally not hard to believe in the least.
But the reason they laugh it off is that there's no real refutation of it, and it only runs afoul of other texts that make it clear he was supposed to be dead. And the hidden bias here is they want you to believe in the inerrancy of the text. They figure it's a question of how to connect the dots.
Well, even the atheists don't go for it, like Bart Ehrman and these other folks. They don't go for the swoon theory either, which I find
well,
funny.
in his case, I think he's still just captive to the apologetic stance of Bruce Metzger. Who, like him, was a textual critic, but Metzger was virtually a biblical inerrantist and an evangelical, as Barth used to be. And I think he's still heavily influenced by that mindset. That's not what drove him out of Christianity. It was the problem of evil. So I think he only to a limited extent saw the real problems with that approach.